Okay, so thanks for all attending this evening. What I was going to do is just to go through Lightroom itself. I went about 18 months ago up to London for 2 days to do the Adobe certified training course on Lightroom. So I've used it quite a lot. But more recently, I've switched and I've got the Adobe Creative Cloud plan. So I've got obviously in there Lightroom, Photoshop, that comes also with Adobe Camera Raw and Adobe Bridge. I'm tending to use more Adobe Photoshop at the moment than I am Lightroom, so I'm not up to speed on some of the very latest releases, and actually there's a release come out today in Lightroom, but that's the only reason I'm doing that is to force myself to learn more about Photoshop just by using it. So there's no choice, and I will switch back and do a lot of my editing in Lightroom because I find it a very powerful, very easy tool.
Yeah.
From an Adobe point of view, one of the questions I get asked a lot about is using Adobe Bridge. And there's no reason why you can't use Adobe Bridge, and it does come as part of the plan. But what I tend to find is people might use Bridge if they just use Camera Raw or Photoshop and don't really use Lightroom. Lightroom has an updated or upgraded version of Bridge built into it for doing all the cataloging and importing of photos. So actually, if you're going to use Lightroom and then Photoshop beyond that, it's a personal choice whether you want to use Bridge or not. Bridge is an older piece of Adobe technology, and I spent the last 15 years working with software suppliers, including the likes of Adobe and Microsoft and things. So I've kind of seen how some of this stuff has materialized over the years. Just kind of other bits of software I use outside of Lightroom. I use the Nick collections, which well, I got it. It was free because Google bought it. I think it might be a chargeable product now, but you can use that inside Lightroom and in Photoshop. And then there's a couple of other products I use inside of Photoshop, but they're sort of for fairly advanced masking techniques. So that's one of the reasons why I'm using Photoshop. Big question I get asked around Lightroom is about the sort of the type of camera you're using and whether you should use JPEG, whether you should be using RAW for it. I think from a camera point of view, the right camera is the one that you've got with you when you're out taking photographs. I don't think there is a wrong or a right type of camera. As long as you can upload your photos into it, then you'll be able to start doing editing. So as long as you can get the photos on your camera, you'll be okay. And with regard to RAW and JPEG, I think the way to be definitely going is loading RAW, because you get a lot more ability to manipulate and modify the image. It's a lot more powerful when you've got a RAW image. Or if you're not sure about RAW, at least do RAW and JPEG. And then you've got the options of loading those in. The only downside with RAW and JPEG is you can end up with duplicate photos when you're importing them into Lightroom, which can take up more disk space on your hard drive or wherever you're storing the images. So again, it's personal choice. I'll share a link afterwards with Mike that he can send around in the email, just about the pros and cons to RAW versus JPEG when you're going to be using them for editing. When it comes to importing your images, one of the things I see a lot, I've helped quite a few friends in the photography world, is around how to structure folders so that you can import the images, you can find them easy or easier. One of the things I took from an online tutorial quite some time ago was to actually have a folder. So I have a top level folder here, which you can see, which is on my D drive, which is my data drive on my computer. So it's a local drive. And I've just got a folder called Photos. And in there, I've got sub-level folders, which I've chosen to be predominantly place names, because I spend most of my time doing landscape photography. That's my passion. There is the odd one of the dog or dogs, so there'll be the odd one in here. But I find that an easy way of doing it, because it's easy to import them, and I'll show you the import and go through that in quite a bit more detail in a moment. It's easier for backing up, something I know Mike has talked about previously on other sort of sessions. So if you've got everything in one place, it's easy to back up, it's easy to restore. And also, if you're kind of limited storage on your computer and you want to be moving images onto the computer to edit, but when you've finished editing you want to then move them off onto an external hard drive or a network attached drive or up into the cloud, as long as you've got that same folder structure mirrored wherever your external storage is, you can literally just move the files into the same folder on the other device. Lightroom will still keep the preview so you can see the image, and if you've got certain settings set, you can even do some editing without the file being there. But what you can then do is you know exactly where to move the files backwards and forwards from, which keeps the performance up of your computer and Lightroom, whilst also keeping the disk space down and allowing you to manage it. And that can be also part of your backup routine. So again, it's just thinking about how you locate all of that and to use it. So single folder, it makes importing photos easier, finding them, backing up, and moving them. What I said with myself, typically landscape photography, but if you were doing different types of photography, so say you were doing portraits, or I know, Anne, you do a lot of wildlife photography, other people might be doing sports. Within the photos folder, you may have subfolders in here. I mean, this one here, Bytes, that's the company I work for. It's a software company, and they asked me to do a photo shoot of some of the employees in my team. So I know exactly what that is looking at it, whereas these, I know the exact locations, but if it was portrait or it was sports, you could then, if you did lots of different types of photography, you can sort of categorize them by using the folders. And a key thing as well is using a balance between the folder structure, so that it's something that's meaningful to you but not overly complicated, and balancing that with using the metadata and keywords to try and find things. So, and I'll cover that in a bit more detail later. But actually it's understanding that at the beginning, because if you get the structure right for you and the styles of photography you use, it can make using the software and finding the photographs, even 2 years down the line, and you want to go and find the photograph that you took of your niece in a bluebell wood somewhere in Dorset. If you remembered the location, you'd be able to go back to it very, very quickly through the folder structure. But if you weren't quite sure, you might be able to use a keyword that was bluebells or your niece's name. And again, the balance of those two can help you find photos very quickly. I mean, I've got 10,000 in here. I'm quite rigorous in when I go through and take a photograph. If I take quite a few and I don't like them, I delete them immediately. I don't just leave them around. So I've probably brought in, I don't know, 10 times that amount of photos, and then just sort of clean them out. So it's just, they can soon build up very, very quickly. Key thing for me that I've sort of learned using Lightroom and also onto Photoshop was around coming up with a standard workflow that will work for yourself. And I think before we sort of delve into Lightroom, I just wanted to kind of go through that with a few sort of thoughts. And it's with all photography, as most of you already know, it's when you're going out, it's taking that photograph, but having in mind what you want that photograph to be, or how you want to use it, whether you're trying to capture a mood, or tell a story or something. And it's making sure that you have that in mind when you take the photograph, because when you get it into Lightroom or even into Photoshop, you can tweak it, and you can do obviously a lot more with Photoshop than you can in Lightroom. Lightroom's more about adjusting it, whereas Photoshop will allow you to properly edit it and make quite significant changes, whereas Lightroom doesn't really allow you to do that. So if you were out taking landscape photography and you wanted to get a really good balance, it might be, okay, I need to have some filters on here, or I don't have any filters, so I'm going to bracket the shot to get sort of different exposure levels, and then blend that all into Lightroom. So it's having that kind of vision up front as to what you want to do with the photograph when you get in there, because then you can start to use some of the power of the tool to actually create the photograph that you had in mind when you took it. So it's just, and also where do you want to do it? Do you want to have the photograph as a wallpaper on your computer? Do you want to print it? Do you want to just use it in social media? All of those obviously have different elements that you need to think about with regard to the sort of the camera, or the whole editing and creation process. So that's just a little bit. Most of you are probably fully aware of all of that anyway, so sorry, apologies if I'm teaching you all to suck eggs, but it was some key learning that I had from my learning, which has really helped me to use the tool and to get the most out of it. Yep, so from any questions on that, sorry, before I kind of move on?
If you want to ask a question, by the way, you've got a choice. You can either press your space bar and unmute and talk, or you can, at the bottom in the participants bit, you can put your hand up or send a chat. So probably the easiest way is just to unmute yourself. Sounds like there aren't any questions.
Okay. Okay, no problem. If there are, when I come to a break, just give me a shout, not a problem. So just coming really to sort of the Lightroom interface, really, just going to sort of work my way through it and show you a few tips and tricks kind of that aren't necessarily, you don't see them in a lot of training videos, but they were certainly covered when I did it. So starting off, up in the top left-hand corner, you've got what they call the identity plate. So yours won't look like mine, but what you can do with a lot of things in Lightroom, one thing to do is when you're moving your mouse around it and you're trying to learn it, just right-click and just see what happens. Because a lot of the time you'll find that there's a hidden menu in there which will give you sorts of lots of options. So in doing this, there's a standard Adobe one, there's a Lightroom Classic, or I've chosen a personalized one. When you select the personalized one, if I did edit the identity plate, it's come up on my other screen. So here you can go in, you can customize it, you can point it at a picture. So if you've created your own sort of graphical one, you can do that, or you can just, like I've done, just put a piece of text in, choose the font and do that. And you can also do the same with the right hand section over there. So, and then obviously just okay that when you've finished, and then you've kind of personalized the identity plate over here.
Oh yeah.
On the right hand side, you've got, these are the standard ones. Apologies, I've tried to reset my Lightroom back to out of factory because I've heavily tweaked mine. So there may be some things where I think I've put it back and I haven't, but I'm hoping, but we'll get to those. I'll spot them as I'm going through. So you've got on here, out of the box, the library develop module. So the library is your catalog. This is where you go to develop it. Mapping is all around any cameras that have GPS data in. You can go to the map view and that will bring up a map of the world. And then you can zoom in and out and see where the photos were that you were taken based on the embedded GPS coordinates of your camera. Book is creating a book. I've never used it, don't like it. That's personal taste, so it's not an area that I'm going to be covering. Slideshow is for creating sort of PowerPoint type slides from there. Again, not something I use, and neither is print or web. I find print, I do all of mine sort of straight out of Photoshop, because I find it far easier than using the print module in here. So when you export it, you can just print it straight off the computer rather than having to mess around. This is more kind of printing multiple images on different sheets and those kind of things. But one of the things you can, and the web is for creating web pages with images embedded in them. But again, if you were to right click on that, what you have is the ability to turn on and off what you want to see and what you don't want to see. So if you don't use certain things, I typically turn off print, turn off slideshow, turn off book. I occasionally use map because I do have a GPS module I can add onto my camera, but I've got a 5D3, so it wasn't built in, but it's an optional extra I got off eBay, so it's not on all of the time, so I turn that off. So that tends to be what I have across the top on a day-to-day basis. In just literally just the library and the develop, and that's all I need to use. Down the left hand side you've got the main kind of navigator, and one of the things to think around is Lightroom is really developed to work from left to right and top to bottom. So when you're importing or when you're editing, you would kind of come in here to the top, and you'd work your way down this list looking for your images. So you'd open your catalog, which is where the photos are stored. So that's basically like the database that holds all the information. In there is links to all of the folders. So that's the raw folders. You might have put those photos in those folders into some collections that make sense to you. And then at the end, if you want to publish some of those photos out automatically it used to do it to Facebook, it doesn't anymore, but it still does it to Flickr, which I used to use. I'm not posting as much on social media now because it was forcing me to rush editing images, and that was a bad habit I wanted to get out of very quickly. But again, you'd come top to bottom. Once you've been through here, you then find your images, and then when you found your images, you can then come across to the right hand side and again work your way down the right hand side to do your edit. So left to right, top to bottom tends to be the way that they've written the software from a user's point of view. As I've mentioned on the other ones, if you right click on here, you've got the ability to catalog. You can't, it's got a star against it. That's the main one there. But if you didn't want folders, or you didn't use collections, or you didn't publish out to Facebook.
Right.
So yeah, so on here, when you right click, you get the ability to turn on and off the folders, the collections, the publish services. So if you didn't publish out to Flickr, yeah, you can turn that off and it's disappeared. Again, to turn it back on, you can just do that. But also a couple of other things in here. You have what's called solo mode, and this is a really, really helpful little click. So when you do this, I've now got published services open, but if I click on collections, it closes the published services one, and it'll only open the one you select. All of the others will automatically close. So what you don't end up with loads of them open, especially in the develop module later on. So it saves you scrolling up and down. So again, just a right click on the top here, turn on or off solo mode, and that will enable that, start that to happen. So that was right clicking on the actual words themselves. If you right click on the area below it, one of the things you can see is this little sort of little Gothic or something little icon here. That is called the panel end mark. So if you click here, you don't see that, but if you click below it, you can go to the panel end mark. You can put your own one in there if you were maybe running this as a business and you wanted to personalize it. So you could personalize your name in the top up here to your business name, and you could put your own logo in, or as I do, I get rid of it because I want it as clean and simple as possible. So that's the text for the columns, or if you do it below, you get all of those, including the panel end mark. And what you'll have noticed, or may have noticed, is when it's on the right hand side as well as the left hand side. So when you turn that off, it goes in both sides.
Oh yeah.
So again, that's just making the menus there. What you may have also spotted is there's a little arrow over here. So this arrow will bring on and off that particular menu. So you may want to use that when you're editing. So it's on at the moment, and I can close that particular menu. So when I actually go into develop mode later on, and I've found the image, I don't really need this menu anymore until I want to find the next image. So I would go and close that filter down, and you can also see the one at the top, there's one at the bottom, and there's one at the right hand side. So a few different things you can do with this. You can use your function keys. So you've got F5 hides the top and displays the top. F6 does the bottom and brings the bottom back. F7 does the left side, brings it back. F8 does the right hand side and brings the right hand side back. So you can quickly turn those on and off while you're editing to get rid of the things that you don't want, to ensure that the photo you're working on is as big as possible on the screen, especially if you're working on a kind of a MacBook, one of the smaller MacBooks, or a laptop, or even on an iPad sort of size screen. Some of the smaller laptops, those sort of 10, 12-inch screens can be quite small. So it just helps hide the bits that you don't actually need to see. Again, right-clicking on the arrow, you have some options. So you have auto hide and show, which is what I've got at the moment. Manual, it literally, you've got to click it to go backwards and forwards. And an interesting one is sync with opposite panel. So if I sync it with the opposite panel, and if I do F7, what F7 is going to do, because I've synced it with the right hand side, which is F8, so F7 and F8 will now work together as one key, so I can hide it, look at the image, go back to do the edit. But I personally don't do that because I like to hide this left hand menu, but when I'm editing I don't want to hide the right hand menu. I want that to be there all of the time. But it's there if you need it. The auto hide, as soon as you come off, it will disappear. As soon as you go over and click, it will appear. You can do what you do, move your mouse off, and it will disappear. So you can have that. Auto hide and show does exactly the same thing, but when you go over it, it will stay until you tell it to go elsewhere. So again, it's another little hidden right-hand mouse button click on there. Let's have a look. I've shown a couple of shortcut sort of keys there, F5, F6, F7 and 8. There are literally hundreds of shortcut menus for Lightroom. So one of the ways to find them is when you're looking on the menus, the drop-down menus, you can see here B, enter, Control R, Control Shift Enter, etc. Same as you would do in Photoshop or a lot of computer applications these days. The best place is if you do a Google search, and again, I'll share these links with Mike so he can share them around afterwards. I use one which was from a website called Lightroom Queen. It's a little bit old. I think it was for Lightroom probably about 2 years ago, but I found it really, really comprehensive and really nicely laid out. It was a PDF file that I could download, and I've printed it. And actually what I did is I took the key ones that I wanted and used all of the time. I created a little A6 or 4x6 kind of photo card with the main ones on, and to this day they're still just, you can't see it, but they're just sat on the cupboard above me just here, and they're all the key ones that I use on a regular basis. I mean, I very rarely look at it now because I've used them for so much, but it was just a really good way of learning. So, but download one of these sheets, print it off, have a look through, and you'll soon kind of work out the ones that you might want to use on a regular basis, which will save you a lot of the time. But if you want to Google it first, Lightroom Queen, and then just put in Lightroom shortcuts or into Lightroom Queen, you'll find it very quickly. Hide what you don't need, because I say there is a lot in Lightroom, especially when you're learning it. It can be quite confusing because there's so much there. So one of the sort of tips I was told and found very useful is just turn off the things that you don't need, knowing that you know where to go and find them when you suddenly start to say, okay, well, now I want to do this, now I want to publish to Flickr, where was that? You can always Google it, YouTube it, and find out, and they'll show you where to do that. Okay, so we've looked at the left-hand bar and the right-hand bar. I'll go through what's in them in a little bit more detail in a moment. And again, on the top bar, you've got exactly the same functionality. Go with the opposite panel, so you can link the top and the bottom. So that one can actually be quite handy, because if you do F5, you're bringing both of them on and off, and actually that's quite a useful thing to have.
Yep.
Whereas the left and the right can be a bit frustrating. So just know that those little ticks or arrows have got both of those on. So those are the kind of main menu areas. Focusing in on them a little bit more, the central area here now is obviously where your images are being displayed. So going through this here, you have at the top to be able to filter and sort on them. So you could sort by, or filter the whole library by text, by attribute. So text, if you wanted to put a particular thing in, you can come into here, you could put a file name, you might put a keyword, you might have some metadata that you want to search on, so you can put that in, and then you can say that it must contain all of the words you've put in, or doesn't contain. So if you were searching for something using that, you could do it. To be fair, I very rarely use that. I find that the cataloging method that I've got works really well for me, and when all else fails, I can come back and use the keyword list rather than the kind of limited things you've got here, the title or the caption. Keyword is obviously the only one I would typically use in here, and that's where I might put in Bluebell and go and find that. You've also got attribute, and I'll show you how to set these a bit later on, but you've got the attribute ability to search. So here, if you flagged an image, so you've flagged it that you want to keep it, you've flagged it because, or you've not flagged it, so it's just a basic import, or you've flagged it as rejected. So there's a way of doing that, and again, I'll show you that as part of the import process. So I import all of my photos in, they come in with this middle one, that's the default, no flag at all. And then I either use the P key, P for pick, will tick it. So those are the ones I want to keep, and X for delete, or that's the one which will flag them, and then you can actually remove all of those from the catalogue in one go, or you can remove them from the catalogue and from your hard disk at the same time. So there's a way of doing that. And I'll show you that a little bit later on. And you've got lots of other ways of editing. So if you're looking for videos that have come in, you can look for those, or virtual copies that you've created, or ones that you've put a color flag against. So I have particular colors that I use for ones that I want to publish on social media, or ones that I want to print, or ones that I just haven't had time to edit and I want to go back and edit them later. So I just color code them, and then I can come and find them very quickly in here. And then you've got star ratings that you can give the photographs when you're in the editor, and again I'll show you later. But these are 1 star, 2 star, 3 star, 4 and 5. They can all mean different things to different people, so it's just good in your own mind to come up with what a 5-star photo means to you and what a 3-star photo means. And there's lots of YouTube videos out there, lots of really good advice, and people have their own methods, and I think you just got to work out what's best for you. But just to know that you can use the combination of colors, flags and stars to kind of rate and help you find images later on. Metadata, so this is all the data that's either coming out of your camera or information that you've loaded. So in here you can see my camera. If you had multiple cameras, you could find out by bodies, or if you were looking for something that you took with a specific lens, again you can come in here and you can do this. I'm only looking at a very small subset that I've created just to show you a few examples this evening, but if I was looking at 10,000 photos, obviously I have a big year range. So again, it can help you very quickly identify the photos. Or maybe you're just looking for a photo of a particular, maybe you're looking for one that you took with a wide angle lens. You're not particularly worried about what it is, but you'd just like to show off the difference between one that was taken at Dartmoor with a 16 to 35 and one that was taken with your 70 to 200, maybe of the same location. So again, can help you do that. And then none obviously just turns all of those off. On the right here you've got a little padlock, so you can lock that down to stop all of this moving, and it will just stay where it is as you've got it set up. So it's entirely, I never use it, but again you can turn that on. And then on the right hand side over here, you've got some basic editing features. So you have your histogram, so you can look at the actual image. Like we saw before, you can turn on and off these. You've got your solo mode, etc. So you've got all of that ability. And then you can see your histogram in here. You've got the quick develop. So if you wanted to apply saved presets, or you wanted to set a particular white balance very quickly, or do some very basic tonal adjustments, you can do that in here without having to go into the develop module. I've never used it. I always go into the develop module because I find it's far more powerful. Whereas here, if you've selected lots of photographs and you click one of these buttons, it's very easy to forget what you've done, and you've got the wrong photos highlighted, and you've suddenly made some changes that you didn't want to make, but you don't know you've made them. So I always find this is a little bit broad brush. So hence I don't use it, but again, it's entirely up to you. If you had a social media profile and you wanted to apply a particular sort of style to it, maybe you wanted an Instagram look and feel, you might have that as a preset, and you might then select that to a folder and then apply that, and it would do it to everything. That would be quite a quick way of doing it, but you can do it in the develop module as well. Keywording is for all of your metadata. So you can see here the one I've got selected, Dartmoor National Park, October. So I import some of these after I add these keywords, sometimes after the import, but also during the import, and I'll show you how to do both of those in a moment. But this is where you can see them. So if I was to come into the metadata search and put in Dartmoor, this photo would be one of those that comes up. And literally, to add extra ones, you just go into there, type in comma, add a keyword. A tip that I was given was kind of try and keep your keywords as simple as possible. If you get them too complicated, it can start to get quite difficult to manage, and they're trying to search through them can become very not difficult, but can be a bit slow and frustrating. So again, I think the mindset of less is more can help out there. But again, you've got to be the judge of your own, but that's where it all is. Keyword list, this is the selection. These are the keywords that I've got, which I've used for all of my photographs. So if I highlighted some and wanted to go and apply those keywords, I can go and do that. You can see here where I've made a silly mistake. I've got boat and I've got boats, but I can quite quickly go and find the boat photos and change the keyword to boats. So sometimes when I've typed it in with a plural and not realized, and then I've kind of messed up my own keyword structure. But again, this is where you can come in and find those. Metadata, so this is all the information that's come out of your camera. You can come in here. These are the two that I do use quite regularly. You can add a title or a caption to a photograph. They can get picked up by social media. Here's all your copyright information, which is in the photograph. So when you're publishing it out, you know that your photograph has always got your copyright data embedded in the metadata, and mine automatically gets put in through the import process, which I'll show you in a minute. There's lots of different types of, there's my copyright one on there, but there's lots of different types of metadata that you can see. We'll see that in there they all are. So EXIF, some of these I don't know what all of them mean, but again, that's where you can go and choose all of those. And then the comments. So if you want to add a comment to your photo, you can do. I've not used it, but again, you can just put that into there. Comments also can come in automatically. So if you published through the publishing services on the left-hand side here to Flickr, when somebody goes onto the social media and they comment about your photograph, when you next open Lightroom and use it, it will sync to Flickr, and it will see that Trevor's put a comment on there about your photograph, and it will upload that comment into your photograph, and it stores that in the metadata so that you've got that for the future. So again, that's a fully automatic process, and I have Flickr set up on here, so all of these photos will will automatically update. It used to work for Facebook. They've trimmed that down now, but you can go on to find more online. It's opening in a web page on my other screen. So, oh, I don't want that. I've lost that. There we go. So you can add you go into this setup menu and you can enable all of those. So that's really the top menu section of Lightroom and all of the side ones. Any questions from anybody on that one before I delve into the bottom section?
Looks not.
Okay, great, thank you. So going across the bottom, a little bit more information down here. So bottom bar in here, and these menus here do change when you're going between the develop module and the library module. So we'll look at the develop one in a moment. Here you've got the grid view. Shortcut key there is G. You've got the loop view, which is full size image. And again, the shortcut key on there is E for loop or whatever. You've got a compare view, so that will allow you to compare two images side by side. So if you've taken two shots of the same location, and you want to have a look at both of them just side by side, you can go into the compare view. It's not going to be a very good example because I've only got a small group of photos that I want to share, but you can see here, and then this is where you then start to say, actually, I don't need that menu anymore, and actually I might not want that menu either, or that menu. So you can start to maximize the size of the image either by using the F keys or by having them auto pop on and off as and when you need them, just whatever's down to personal taste. I'm going to leave them on most of the time in this, just so that you can kind of see the full interface. You've got one here which is a survey view. I've never really used it. It's starts to allow you to get multiple images up and start to do some quite clever comparisons to it. But I think for now I'm going to skip that one. If we want to look at that in a bit more detail, we could do a separate session on some sort of more advanced parts of Lightroom. And the final one, I haven't got any. I don't do a lot of portrait photography, so I've not got this set up. But if you did, you can set Lightroom up to do facial recognition. So then you can go in and say, this person is Mike, this person is Stuart, this person is Trevor. And once it recognizes that person, then you can use this as a way of going in and searching, because you say, just show me all the photos I've got of Trevor, and they would all start to appear. And it is actually very good, quite scarily good sometimes. So just note that that is there if you need it, if you do that type of photography. You have, I'm going to skip the spray brush for the moment, I'll come back to that in a second. You have the ability to sort the photos, so you can go top to bottom, bottom to top, and you can choose the type of sort that you want. So whether you want to do it by the capture time, or you want to sort it by your rating, or you maybe want to sort it by all of the color labels that you've put together, you can go in here and choose the sort. Capture time is what I use 99.9% of the time. I find that's the easiest way of doing it, and it works really well with my kind of folder structure. And then here you have the flags. So you can see this one here has got a pick flag, so this is P. It says photo is flagged. That is a rejected photo, so the X for reject, obviously the 5 stars and the color ratings that you can then apply here. On the right hand side you have thumbnails, so you can increase or decrease the size of those depending on how many photos you're looking at. So I'm going to leave mine there for the moment. And then on the right hand, so very right hand side here, this little down arrow. This allows you to turn on and off view modes. You can turn off the sorting. So if you said, actually, I don't want the color labels, I can turn them off. I can turn off the ratings. I can turn off the flags. And so you can turn on and off the bits down here that you don't typically use on a regular basis. So again, keeping it nice and clean and simple. bottom of the left-hand menu is your import and export. So import's the big piece I'm going to jump to in a moment, and then we'll cover export if we get time towards the end. Happy to do another session if we run out of time this evening. And then on the right hand side, you've got some settings here. So if you're working with multiple images and you've set, say for instance, I went to this one here of the church in Dartmoor, and you made some settings here, I could then sync by clicking multiple images. So when I've got the left hand one highlighted here, if I hold my left shift key down and click the others, you can see that the left one I picked originally is slightly brighter in color than the other two. So this is the primary photograph that I've selected. The other two are classed as the secondaries. And if I was to click sync metadata or sync settings, that would take the metadata or the settings from the primary photo and sync it across all of the other photographs. So if you've put your keywords, all your keywords into one photograph, you can do your sort of large parts of your catalog very quickly by doing it that way. Or maybe you've done some exposure work and you've got it right on one photo and you want all of the photographs of the same place taken at the same time to have the same sort of tonal light levels. If you've got it right on one, you can select all of the others, sync the settings, that will sync it across all of them, and then you don't have to do the same edit on every single photograph. So you have that ability all the way through Lightroom to modify one and then copy all of the work you've done. And you can copy all of it or some of it, and I'll show you that in a little bit later. Bottom view here, I have twin screen at home, so I can flick on number 2. Obviously you won't be able to see that. That would just bring up a second Lightroom window which would have the image I'm currently working on full screen, so that I can be working on it in here, and then I can look at it across on here on the opposite screen, and then obviously you can see it a lot bigger. When you zoom in, you can see a lot more detail. So if you've got 2 screens on there, you can do this. Grid layout, you can turn this on the second screen and you can move this across. This is the collection that I'm in at the moment, and then this is the image that I'm in, and then on the right hand side over here, here are your filters. So if I wanted, obviously you've got a small collection, but if I clicked the one there, I've only got one image that's flagged, so just in clicking that, it's just showing the flagged. Click it again and that will disable that filter. So again, it's a different way of, similar to the filters we used up here. Again, you've got them on the bottom here. So that's why you can turn them on and off in certain places to put them where is most appropriate for you. It makes it a lot easier. Filter, again, you can save sort of preset filters and use those. And then on the little tick on here, what this is doing is hiding the top menu. So again, that's another way of controlling that here. A hidden feature which gets missed a lot in the Lightroom is on each of your images, you've got these grey menu bars at the top. And all of these settings can be found up in the menu here. So if you go through all of this, it is all in there, but it's a lot easier to find it through a right click. So if I right click in here, I've suddenly got a huge menu. So I've got file extension, so I can see DNG here, because that's the file type that I use. But if I change that and said, actually, I want that to be the rating, I've got the rating down here. That's not a good example, really. Copy name, let's show another one. So just got the index number on there now.
Yeah.
So you can turn on and off various different settings. What you need to do is to go through these and play with them. If you wanted your ISO rating, you can put your ISO rating in there. And depending on which ones you select, they will appear either here or over here. And so you can adjust that to suit the information that you need to quickly see when you're editing photographs. Again, that's another right-hand menu. And then finally at the bottom, you have we see a smaller version of the grid view of all of the photos that you've got. So when there's a lot of photographs in here, you can scroll backwards and forwards through this and you can see them. You can click on the image so you can see the same one is clicking in the top view. You can do the left shift and highlight them, and again this one is slightly brighter, certainly is on my screen anyway, to these two here. So you can do exactly the same in this little mini view than you can in the main sort of view up here. So if you had that in single view, you'd still be able to look at these different images on there. If I come back to here, and let's just turn to there. Okay, so the one that I was going to come back to here is the spray can. So what you can do is with the spray can, you can click on a photograph, and then it allows you to, by clicking or dragging across multiple photographs, you can take metadata, or you can take settings or rotations or keywords, and you can just literally spray them onto multiple photographs. So if you had a load of photos which had, when they were imported, were on their side, you could edit one of them, change the rotation of it. Once you've changed the rotation, you can just copy that with the spray can and then just go on to all of the others in this view. And when they're in this view in here, if I had it all done, you can then zoom in and out of these, this thumbnail. So if I was back on here, what's that? Oh, it's because I'm in done, that's why. So you could literally zoom right out so you can see as many as you can, and then you could just go click, 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 and they would all spin. Yeah. So you're just applying with a paintbrush very quickly, rather than having to go into each individual image and say edit, edit, edit. It's going to be very time consuming. Let's just bring those. But when you're in there, you can see, you can select that, select the one you want to copy, and then you at the end you have to say done when you've finished doing that, because it's allowing you literally just to go and keep clicking on all the photographs. Okay, so that's really the whole interface, certainly in the library module. Just have a look if I've covered everything. Yeah, so if there's any questions anybody's got, we've done
might be a good time to take a break, actually. Yeah,
a little drink. And so hopefully that session's given you a good overview of the interface, and some sort of tips and tricks on there. What I was going to do next is to kind of walk through a workflow which I've learned whilst I've been doing my editing from experience, but also from kind of some courses and tutors that I've worked with. So, but again, everybody needs to have their own workflow and find out what works for you, and the style of photography that you particularly like to do. So first thing obviously we need to do is to import some images into Lightroom. So bottom left hand corner here, you've got an import button. This,
are you sharing your screen, Andy?
Oh, sorry, yes.
Yep.
Thank you. Just testing you all there. So yes, so the import obviously references back to the folder structure that I've got built, the way that works. So going into the import, again, top to bottom, left to right, this window is going to appear. So I've got a memory stick in, which have got some photos I've taken over the last couple of days. So, but this could be an external hard drive. This is an SD card in a reader. It could be direct into your camera if your camera can connect to it. Mine's also got some network drives, and I've got a NAS which it can see, so it can come from any source. And then what you'll then see is obviously all of the photographs that you've got that have been taken. So this was the dog in the garden the other day, that we can then import in. You have the ability to select the photos that you want to work with. You can tick in all of them, untick and tick them, and it's going to import the ones that you've got ticked. So what it also does is you can say, well, look at all of the photos or just look at the new photos. And what it's doing is it's looking at the source where they're going to go, or the destination, sorry, of where they're going to go to, and the source of where they're coming from. And it's going to highlight new photos if some have already been imported. Say you've done 3 or 4 imports into different folders from the same card, you can see what's already been imported and what hasn't been imported. And you can go to destination folders and that will show you the photos that are in there. You've got individual mode, and you've got grid mode. You've got obviously uncheck all, check all, which is the same as all photos at the top there. So different ways of approaching that. You've then got the key piece here, which is copy as DNG, copy, move, or add. So add is just going to add the source of the photos into your library, and it'll leave the photos where they are, and rather than having them all in that nice photo structure that we talked about earlier, it's going to be pointing off to lots of different locations on your computer, and you won't move them. So you wouldn't want to point that at your SD card on your, or to your camera itself and say add, because it will put them in, but as soon as you disconnect that, the photos will be lost because it can't see them because the source has disappeared. You have move. So move is literally going to, as it says on the tin, will move the photographs from where they are. So if you had 2 hard drives and you had an old catalogue or a load of old photos on a hard drive and you wanted to move them from that into your new computer, you could then use the move, and obviously it will move them, and as it moves them, it would then put them into the correct folder and do all of the work you want to do. So sometimes you can use that for old photographs, and you can use that for applying settings or applying keywords in bulk, and tidying up lots of old images that you've got, or ones that you've maybe been given by somebody else. Copy, it's going to do what it says on the tin. It will leave them where they are, and it will just copy, take a new copy of them and put them in. I tend to use the copy method personally myself, and I've chosen to use copy as DNG. For those of you, if you've not come across DNG before, that's Adobe's version of RAW, so it's a digital negative. There's different trains of thoughts. I'll share a link again with Mike so that he can push this round afterwards, have a read, and you can make your own decision. There's pros and cons to both. If you don't use the digital negative, what you get is you'll get your RAW file, which will come in from your camera, and then any edits that you make go into what's called a sidecar file, which has the file extension .xmp. And that has all of the kind of metadata and the edits, and those 2 files need to be kept together. If you lose one, obviously the other one is useless. They're the same file name, just the file extensions are slightly different. And there are some pros to having that. As I say, there's quite a debate about it. Some people have gone one way and then after a couple of years they've switched back the other way, and so I'm not going to go into those, but I will share a link. But the digital negative, it will basically convert the .nef or the .cr2, whether you're a Nikon or Canon or other. It will convert it to a file extension which is .dng, and what that does is that brings across all the camera EXIF data and digital data, brings across obviously all the photo. It does lose the JPEG embedded file that you would typically have in a RAW file, but you can recreate that if you needed to from the DNG. But what it does mean is you don't have to worry about the sidecar file and the files getting separated and getting in a bit of a pickle between those two. So all of the edit data as well is kept in the DNG, so you've just got one file to worry about. And then when you're backing files up or moving them or copying them, personally I find it's a little bit less risky, but again, it's a personal choice. So copy would just copy the CR2, this will do exactly the same thing. Once it's copied the CR2 across, it then applies a second process, which then converts the CR2 or the NEF into the DNG, and the raw file will be lost on the computer, but obviously you've still got the original raw file on your memory stick or wherever, on the camera, wherever it came from. So we've started on the left-hand side, we've found the source, we've looked at the photographs, we've selected the photographs that we wanted to import, which could be some or all or whatever. We've chosen how we want to import them. Then what we need to do on the right-hand side is select the destination. As shown on the library module, you can turn on and off solo mode, panel end mark, so you can do all of the same kind of settings in this window as you could in all of the others. And you can choose file handling. So the first thing it's going to do, again we're working top to bottom, is build the previews. So when it's imported, if you want it to import really fast, but then every time you click on an image, it has to build the preview for you. So your imports will be extremely quick. You can select minimal. Embedded in the sidecar does a little bit more processing to create your sort of thumbnail preview images. Standard is even more, or one-to-one is what I tend to have. And the recommendation is either to have standard or one-on-one when you import, because these aren't a real preview of the image. So these are slightly slower but a better quality image, and they'll allow you to do more without actually having the image there at all. Smart previews, if that hard drive where the source images was lost, or you just didn't attach it, maybe you'd put it in the car and you'd forgotten it, you can actually, with a smart preview, you can actually edit the image from the preview. So that is a bit of a fail-safe, if you like, just in case you've lost something. Don't import suspected duplicates. I have that selected all the time. So if I've imported some photos from a card, and then I've forgotten to format the card, and I've gone out and taken a load more photos on the same card, and I bring it back in, put it into the camera, it'll come up and say, well, you've already imported these, so it will automatically remove the ticks from them, and you can select them if you want to, but by default they won't be selected, and all it will do is focus on and highlight on the new ones that it hasn't seen before. So that is, I have that ticked all the time, because that's a bad habit. I always forget to format my cards. So it saves on duplicates. And then there's a couple of other extra ones you've got. So I do use this some of the time. I've recently set up some CCTV at home, so my NAS is being used for that. So I need some bigger hard drives. But what you can do is you can turn this on. This would go to my network attached storage device. And when I do the import, it would create the DNG file, or convert the raw file to a DNG file into Lightroom. But at the same time, during the import, it will take a copy of the raw file and put it somewhere else. So if that was your Dropbox folder on your PC that then synced with the cloud, or an external hard drive or network attached storage, however you do that, you can do that. So that can be part of your backup regime, so that you always know, worst case scenario, if your catalog got corrupted or your files got lost with all of your edits, at least you know that you've got the raw file still available somewhere else if you need to go back and get it. So I do normally have that, but say I need some more storage, so that's turned off for me at the moment. And then if you wanted to add certain photos, say you had a particular collection of types of photographs that you're wanting, and you wanted to add these photos to that collection when you're doing the import, you can do that automatically through the import process as well. So what it's doing is it's copying the photos, it's converting them, and then when I won't do an import because it does all the conversions. I'm just conscious of time, but you'll get multiple bars going across the top. So one will be the import, and then the conversions will start to run in parallel. So you might end up with 2 or 3 or 4 bars all running at the same time, doing all the different things that it's doing as part of the import process. So that's the first section, the file handling. Then you get file renaming. So in here, this is where you can get the system to rename the actual file names from the camera onto the PC so that they make a little bit more sense. So I have that enabled. I've set some custom settings, and there's some standard ones that you can choose from just by clicking the sort of little double arrows on the right hand side there. And the one I've chosen, it's on the other screen, sorry, is I always put year, month, day in front, because then all of the files always sort chronologically by date. And then I put the camera file name on the beginning. So that means I don't get duplicates, because the combination of these is very, very unlikely to be ever the same, if ever. So I won't risk overriding a different photograph. So always keep it quite simple. You can add various different bits and pieces if you want to put a sequence number on. I find I don't need to, but that's the importing. And then I've just told it extension. You can say, do you want the file extension, so the .dng or the .cr2? Do you want to leave it as it is, have it in uppercase or lowercase? I like all of mine to be lowercase, just no particular reason, again, personal choice. And then you can see here a sample of what the import's going to look like. So that's your file naming. You have apply during import. So this is a real time saver. You have the keywords. So in here I could start to type in dog's name, comma, whatever, and it would apply that keyword or set of keywords to every photograph that's being imported. So if you've got 3 or 4 different kind of photo shoots on one card, you might want to do that as multiple imports so that you can apply the different keywords to different sets of photos, or you can apply keywords to the photos later. You've got develop settings. So in here, what I've done is I've created my own preset, which is called import standards, and I'll send Mike some details on how to create a simple preset, and if we get time I'll be able to have a look at that afterwards. But basically, when you're in the develop module, you can go into a photograph and you can apply certain types of edits that you want, and save them as a user preset. You give it whatever your name. I've called mine import standards, and that will do the same adjustments to the photograph every time it comes in. So for me, I've got the camera profile is adjusted, so I set mine to faithful. You could set yours to landscape or neutral, whichever one you kind of prefer, to mirror what's on the camera, or maybe you want to have it slightly different. I remove sharpening from I want to control the sharpening myself rather than it being sharpened, which is what Lightroom does. It adds 25% sharpening by default when it applies it, so I turn that off. I also apply lens correction, so I remove chromatic aberration and I enable lens profile corrections, all as part of the import. So when I said it imports and you get these multiple bars going across, these are some of the bars you'll see where it's applying all of these things to all of your photographs, which I want to do to every single photograph when I bring them in. And I keep that fairly simple. And I also apply at the same time some metadata. So in here, you can come into edit the presets, and it's come up on the other screen, sorry. So in here, this just brings up a dialog box. And if I go to my Andy Hill copyright one here, I've put in the information that I want for my copyright, and then that information is automatically applied to every single photograph when I import them, so I can't forget to do it. And you can, as I say, you can, on the import standards, you can get it to do as much or as little as you want. Okay. And then finally, destination. So where do we want it to go to? So these are all the ones of the dogs. So I would go to the Gizmo and Archie folder. And one thing just to note on the top here, I'll have to scroll up and down so you can see this, but I could tell it to put it into a subfolder, and I can tell it what name that subfolder needs to be, and it will create a subfolder in the Gizmo and Archie folder called that name. What I've chosen to do is to choose by date. I've told it the date format that I want, so in here you can select the format that you would like. And what that then does is when I've selected that, it will automatically create subfolders for you in the date format that you've chosen, so this format here, but it will look through all of your photos and say these top ones were taken on this date, so I'll create a subfolder called that date. Now all of them were taken on this particular date, so it's going to create that subfolder, but that might be 10 different subfolders, all with different photos taken on different dates, and it will build all of that automatically for you. So personally, for me, when I'm searching for a photograph, it's very, rather than sort of doing it by date format, and then in a year's time I can't remember what day it was I took those photos, I can come in and look at the cataloguing, say, well, I know it was of the dogs, and I know it was sometime last year. Okay, which were the folders I did last year, and I can go through and look for them. And then again, using all of the keyword searching on top of it. So that is my personal way of doing it. But as I say, everybody is different depending on the types of photos you use. But as I say, I'd like to keep it kind of as simple and as flat a structure as possible, because it makes it easier for backing up and all of those searching and finding things later on. So once you've done all of this, and I say the first time you use it, you'll have to go through and create your presets and do all of those things. But once you've done it once and set it up, you don't have to go through and do it again. So it's worth, first time you do, just go through these, look at each different one, looking at this custom setting for your file naming, and certainly look at this develop settings and this metadata. Once those two are done, then that's pretty much it. You won't have to change them again. And then, so gone left to right, top to bottom, get down to the bottom, you then click import, and that's going to import all of those photos and process them and put them into that folder, and it will do all of those processes for you.
Very good.
Okay, so any questions there on the processing side, or the importing side, sorry?
Not for me. If you want a question, you'll have to unmute yourself, because most of you are muted at the moment. I think that's a no.
Okay.
No, I had a question, if that's all right.
Sorry,
Yeah.
The import file name string that you had there with all the complicated biblical brackets and whatever else it was, can you make sure that that goes out on the email with Mike? Because it looked incredibly complicated and I missed most of it. I didn't get round to writing it down.
All right.
That one there.
That's the one.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's fairly straightforward. So what you do, all you want is the date and the file name. The file name will be in, and all you do is you click in here, and then if you wanted the file name, you'd then click insert, and that will put in YYYY. But in here you've got, there's the one that I use, YYYY.
Right. And does it automatically add the brackets around it?
Yep. Yeah, it does.
Wonderful.
So,
okay.
So if you just start sort of playing with this drop down and hit insert, and if it doesn't quite look like the one I've got on here, you can just highlight the whole thing, delete it, and then start again.
Wonderful.
I used to put these bits on the end of it and the beginning of it, and it just became so cumbersome, and actually it didn't add any value, so I simplified it right back down.
Okay. Cheers, Andy.
No problem. Okay, so we've imported all the photos now. We've got them into Lightroom. It's done all its clever jiggery pokery behind the scenes. So now what we've got on the left-hand side are the catalogues. So these are the, sorry, let's start at the very top. We've got the navigator. So if I select on the photographs, you're going to see the actual image thumbnail of it here. To the right of the navigator, you've got fit, fill, 1 by 1, 2 to 1, and you've also got lots of other ones hidden behind there. So some of these you will use if you're doing spot removal or you're looking at noise in a photograph and you want to get in quite close to look at noise and things like that. You can set the ones you tend to use on here. So I tend to use 1 to 1 and 2 to 1. So when you're clicking on those, you'll see them. You'll see it zoom in and zoom out. So that's gone right in. That's gone back to fit, and then we can go and go back to thumbnail view. Let's say if you change this end one, this very end one will change. All the rest will always stay the same. It's just that very end one that you've got there that you're changing. So that's your navigator. You've got your catalog. So the catalog is basically the master database which stores all of the information to where all the images are located. The trick with Lightroom, which I fell foul of many times, and I see a lot of people when they're learning fall foul of it, is when you're moving photos, move the photos in Lightroom. Don't move them outside, because as soon as you move them outside of Lightroom, you'll get orphan links in Lightroom because it can't see them. It says they're in folder A and you've put them in folder B, and it doesn't know that. So if you can move them around in the folders piece here, which I'll show you in a second, and then that will make sure they're all linked.
I have a very silly question, if I may.
No, none are silly.
Oh, okay, you can hear me. In all photos, I very often find myself going back to all photographs and bringing up the whole list, which drops down. I've got a couple of hard drives underneath here. And in all photos, I may pick up a single photograph from a collection on the gallery view, and I want to find that in the folders. Is there any way in which you can go from the image which you've found in all photos to identify which folder it is in?
One of the ways you can do it, if you right click on the image itself, you can go to folder in library,
okay, or
go to collection, or you can even say show in Explorer or whatever the equivalent is on an Apple Mac. Sorry, I'm not a Mac expert, but yeah. So again, it's this magic right click menu that's hidden everywhere, basically in Lightroom. So you can use any of those three.
Okay, and one more silly thing. Gizmo, your dog, does it have a couch with Gizmo written on it?
No, it doesn't.
Okay, because I've got a photograph of a dog that looks like yours. I took it at a country show a couple of years ago. Beautiful little dog with Gizmo written over his chest. Never mind. Okay, I'm muting myself again.
No problem. Thanks, Mike.
Bye.
So the catalogue is the database. I've got one catalogue. Say I've got 10,000 images in it. Some people choose to have a catalogue per style of photograph. Some people might have one for each year, depending on how many photographs you've got. And it's the balance between how big the catalogue gets, how stable it is. If it got corrupted, what would you lose? And again, that's all very personal. So I've got one, I back it up regularly. My computer does that automatically anyway, up to my NAS. So you can choose what you want to do. If you've got multiple, you've obviously got the chance of importing one style of photograph into another. But again, that's just down to kind of naming them all. So if I had multiple catalogues, I would go up to the file and I would open a different catalogue and then import the photos into that catalogue. And if I'm switching between catalogues, I can go open recent and I can go in here. You can see some slightly different names on here, and these are to do with, I created this one in 2017, and each time Lightroom does a major update, sometimes it updates the format of the catalogue, which it needs to. So each time it puts a -2 on the end. So that was it when I created it in 2017. That was a major upgrade where the catalogue format was changed, and then that was another upgrade. So it's created those two different ones. And so that's the that's the reason for the -2 on the end. So I just work on one catalog, but it's entirely up to you. You have some standard names or catalog filters that you can apply. So you can all synced photographs, that's if you're using the Adobe products in the cloud. It will show you which ones are synced between the two. Some quick collections, what was brought on the previous import. So if you'd imported some stuff and you come back to it a few days later and think, right, I wanted to import those particular photos, you can click that and it will take you back to the last ones you imported. So that's what they are. Folders, these are the folders which you've seen. So again, this is where you then start to come in and click on the different photographs in the different folders. So you can edit on those. Collections, I don't tend to use collections that much, but if you had, sorry, my Alexa's suddenly started waking up, shut up. You can create specific collections of different types of photographs if you want to. Say I don't tend to use them a lot, but I did create this one here just as an example for this evening. So I've just added some photos in, but that could be whatever you want it to be. And literally you just go into here, you create a new collection in here, and you can then drag the photos in and create them. Or you could create a smart collection. Now, a smart collection works in exactly the same way of grouping the photos together, but what it will do is it will work out which photos need to go in there based on the criteria that you give it. So that could be keywords. So if you said, I want landscape photos with bluebells, and you gave it those two landscape and bluebell keywords, or sunrise photos or whatever, it will bring all of those automatically into that one collection. So if I put pets or gizmo or Archie or dog, it would create that collection and automatically add those photos in based on my keyword tagging. So again, depending, if you're not using keywords, you can use other criteria, the EXIF data from the camera, but the more you use it, the more powerful this becomes.
Yeah.
Can I ask if this is where you create new folders as well?
So the new folders would be in here.
Yeah.
So you can right click in here and you can rename, go to Explorer, create various bits. But the way you would typically do it is on the import process.
Right.
So you would click this folder here, and you would come to the right hand side and you would have your destination. So here's all of my folders.
Yep.
And if I suddenly said, okay, I haven't got, there's my main photos folder, but I don't have a subfolder yet for my dogs. You can right click on photos, say create new folder.
Brilliant. Thank you. That's what I wanted.
That will then create it. When you then call it that and you select the new folder you just created, it would automatically, based on my settings, create a subfolder underneath it with the date and import the photos into that.
Magic. Thank you. That's what I wanted.
You're welcome. Okay, so I've got that here. Okay, and then the final one I've got is the publish. So say, have a play around with these. I think it's only Flickr. There are some other ones you can download for other sort of social media types off Adobe's website. So it's basically a plugin. So here's ones I've kind of set up on my Flickr account. So I can click on here and I'll see some sunset photos. Sunrise photos. So I've got folders in there that will publish these photographs up there. I did one for when I went to Iceland. So again, it will automatically do these. And this is where, I don't know whether I've got any, let's see if I've got any examples. So this one here, you can see on the right hand side here, when it's synced with Flickr, you can see these three people have put their comments against it. So there were 3 comments and there were 12 favorites that people have used off Flickr. So they are imported and they're actually stored within the digital negative file. So if I ever want to refer to them, I've got that information myself rather than kind of losing it in social media. So that all comes in as part of that, and it's a sync process. Each time you go in, it will do the quick scan and do the update based on the profiles that you've got set here. So have a play around with that one.
The other thing that's quite interesting with the publishing is if you subsequently edit one of those files to improve it a bit more, it will update those to the...
Yeah, it republishes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it pushes it all out. Okay. Let's just have a look. Okay. Right. So if I come to collections and I come to this one here. So I'm just going to show a few little bits. I'm not going to focus tons on the actual editing because I think editing is quite a personal process. But what I will do is kind of show you around some of the menus so that you can go and have a play yourself and show you a few tips along the way. So this is obviously we're still in the library module now. With these particular images, what we're going to do now is switch into the develop module. So at the top right hand corner here, we've switched into that. We can go back into where's that gone? There we go. So we can look at the various different images in here. Left hand menu has stayed the same. With the navigator at the top, but now we've got presets. So there's my import standards preset that I created. These are some standard ones that Lightroom comes with. Presets are a personal thing. You can buy presets of the internet. My personal preference, and everybody's got their own view on this, is I don't buy I don't buy presets because I think all you're doing is you're using somebody else's edit for your photo, and you end up just clicking lots of different presets and going, oh, I think I like that one better than I like that one. And for me, that kind of goes against learning how to use the tool. You're just going click, 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 click. So I think using the tool and creating your own presets, I think is a really good way of going, because it allows you to have a consistent style or look and feel to your images if that's something that you're trying to achieve. But just buying somebody else's presets, unless there's something specific that you're trying to do, I kind of steer away from spending money on those, but there's a lot out there if you did want to go down that route. Snapshots. Oh, my machine is, oh, it's because I haven't got any snapshots, that's why. So you can take a snapshot at a different point in time of the edit. So if you'd got part of the way through and then you thought, do I want to go this way or that way with the edit? Do I want to boost the colors in the sky and maybe go a little bit artistic and then try going the other way and make it look more natural? You can take snapshots of the edits at certain times, and then you can roll back to a snapshot very quickly, and then you can compare between the snapshots. So you would do a certain edit to a certain point, you would click on the plus, that dialog box will pop up, so you give it the name that's meaningful, and then you'd see multiple snapshots for this particular image, allowing you to jump backwards and forwards between them. The history is the edit history. So this was the process I went through when I was doing this particular photo. And you can clear this out, you can step backwards and forwards between it, so you can step back, step up to the different one, you can see what it's doing. And then collection name we've got at the bottom here. On the right hand side are the main edit functionality. So same in here, solo mode, end panel off. And this is where I think solo mode comes into its own, because if it's not and you start having all of these open, you can end up with an awful lot of scrolling. Whereas with solo mode, most of the time you've got everything on the one screen. Tiny little bit of scrolling there at the bottom, but actually it becomes a lot easier, a lot more manageable when you've got it in solo mode. I personally have the histogram on all the time, but quite a lot of the time what I would tend to do is to hide that left hand side. I'm in the develop module now, so I can get rid of that top menu as well. So I've now made the screen or the image as big as I possibly can. I could close the bottom if I wanted to, make it even bigger, but actually sometimes you want access to this menu down here, just so that you can select the images that you're looking at. With sliders, so opening the menus here, all of these menus have, I'll go back to that basic one, it's the best example, all of these little sliders. So a little tip is if you want to put a slider back to the default, you can just double click on the word itself and the slider will go back to 0. So if you're moving this around and you're going, okay, I'm not really how I want it to go back to where it was, double click on that and it will reset it all. So you can very quickly double click all of those and put them back to the middle, and then Control Z is what I was using there just to bring them back, or you can come back into here and go back to your history and step through the history to get back to where you were. So little tip on there is just double click. Another keyboard shortcut, so I will send out a link to all of these, but one I really like is L for lights out. So I can press L. Both of my screens have gone fairly dark, focusing on the image itself, but you can just see the menus. If I press L again, it'll go pure black with just the image. So again, I'm not distracted by anything around it. And then if I press L again, it will bring me back to normal mode, so that you're just cycling through those. And all of the edge around the photograph, if I come in here, I've chosen dark grey, but I could choose medium grey, I can choose white. So, and again, then in lights out, it'll go black, but in your working mode, you can choose the custom color of that. Again, it's another sort of hidden right mouse click menu. We talked very briefly about image rating. So if we were to go back to these particular images here, a fast way of doing that is the numbers 1 to 5. So if I press 1, I'm going to get a 1 star. If I press 2, I'm going to get 2 stars. You get the drift.
Yep.
Okay, so doing those. And in this view as well, you've got the P for pick, which, so if I go into that one, sorry, so it's not done, I'll do P for pick, which puts that little white flag up here. I can do X, which will flag it for reject, so that's one I want to delete. Or if I press the same key, where's it gone? It's gone out of my catalogue.
I think it's done a people search somewhere along the line.
It should. Yeah, it's gone into, there we go, it's back. So yeah, so P and X, and I think the other one is P and the other one is U for unflag. And one of the hidden things is if you turn on caps lock on your keyboard and then I do P for pick, it automatically jumps to the next photograph. So that I can do P and then I could do X and I can do P and I can do X. And so very quickly, just using a couple of key strokes, you can cycle through all of the photos, and sometimes I'll just do the, just highlighting the ones I want to get rid of. So just do the U for unflag and that will move to the next one. And then I'll just do X, U, X, 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 U, X, U, and work my way through that. And that is the caps lock on the keyboard that makes it jump from one photograph to the next photograph automatically. That's quite a time saver of a lot of images. Okay. So I'm just scrolling on my notes on the other side. So looking in the develop side, what you've got here, obviously the main histogram, when you're moving, let's pick the normal one. When you're moving over the histogram, what you can see is this little piece of text here, which says ISO 100 at the moment. If I move to this left end, that's the blacks. Then that's the shadow area of the histogram, the midtones, the highlights, and the whites. So when I'm in the basic module, if I then said, okay, actually what I want to do is bring the blacks in, then I know that moving that is going to have that impact on the blacks, or bring the whites in. So actually looking at visually what I'm going to be editing on the histogram, and making sure that I'm adjusting the right slider to get the right effect. So if I want to sort of bring everything together, I can use the histogram itself here to give me an indication as to what. And you can see the menu beneath is changing focus. So you can see the highlight is text is brighter than the white, then the exposure, shadows, and that there. And in the corners, you've got some little arrows here. So show shadow clipping and show highlight clipping. Now there's none in this particular photo, but I picked this one here. Shadow clipping, there's nothing, and if there was shadow clipping it goes blue, but you can see in here the highlight clipping right on the very bright has gone red, so that I can see that that's blown out. Now this was a bracketed shot, so that's the normal exposure, that's the dark exposure, and that's the overexposed. And then what I'll do is I'll blend them in a minute so that you can see what Photoshop, what Lightroom can do in that. But this is your highlight clipping and your shadow clipping, so that you can look at the image itself and visually see that. You've then got profile, so here color and black and white. So if you want a black and white image, I always take everything in color because I can create the black and white from it. Can't go the other way, so you can do that. Profile correction, landscape, mine's automatically adjusted to the way I want it to be for most of my photographs. I do change some of them. Most of them I used to use landscape. It's a little bit more vivid. I've now switched to faithful because it's a more natural look. But these are applied through the import process, so I don't. Once I know which one I want to keep, if it's the same all the time, I can do that. You've got the white balance, so you can do it auto. It will work out what it thinks is the right one, and then you've got all the standard ones in here. So I can go to auto. Or I can go to daylight, cloudy, etc. And you can always go back to as shot. You can then manually tweak them in here. And you've got a white balance selector here. So on here, what it's looking for is a mid-tone grey. So if you were kind of coming on here and you're looking for a kind of a mid-tone grey, you could select it and it will set the white balance based on that mid-tone grey. If you were doing portrait photography, or even if you're doing landscape photography and you stand in front of the camera for your first shot and you use a black, white and a grey card, you've always guaranteed to have a mid-tone grey in there, because you've got the card, and then you could use that to help adjust the white balance to make sure that's correct. As cheap as chips off Amazon. I've got one on a little lanyard thing that I carry around and use, but it just helps. So you can pick that. There's all sorts of videos on YouTube and things, and different ways of doing white balance, but I think it's for me, it's certainly for the landscape photography that I'm doing. I've seen lots of people rushing edits, which I used to do a lot of, and I'd get it completely wrong, and I'd end up with some horror story which I thought I was really proud of until I woke up the following morning and looked at it and went, "Oh, what have I done?" So taking your time and kind of working out the white balance is really key to getting a really natural, nice looking photo. And then you've got sliders, temperature and tint, so you can tweak them as you need to. You've then got a second section within the basic panel here, which is the tone. So this is your exposure, your contrast, highlights, dark shadows, and then another section which is more texture, clarity, dehaze, vibrance and saturation. There's an auto button, you can click it, it will work out what it thinks is the right settings for you, and using the backslash on your keyboard you can quickly toggle between the before, and you can see just up near the histogram it says before. I press the backslash again on my keyboard, that's what it's created. So I can very quickly just flick between the two to see which one I like, and make a decision whether I'm just quite happy with the auto or whether I want to do something manually to it, or you might use the auto as your starting point and then go from there. Again, it's all sort of personal taste. So let's just do that. So I'm going to set that all back. I showed you the double click on the sliders, so they're all okay.
Sorry, how did you go back?
Control Z on the keyboard.
Okay.
I don't know what that'll be on a Mac, sorry. But yeah, just on my keyboard, I just did a Control Z and it just brings it back. The other way of doing it, if you want to do multiple steps, is to go through this history, and here's all of the steps that I've taken. So if I wanted to roll it back 5 steps, I could come back to the convert to black and white on there, and that's where I converted it, and then I can bring it back to the very latest one. So that's all there. Yep. Okay, so these are all your sliders. A couple of these are fairly new. I think it's the clarity one or the texture one that they've brought in fairly recently on the major upgrade. So again, come into these, play around with them. Tip I was kind of given is, if you're not quite sure how much is too much, somebody said to me, if you go into the photograph and you start to then slide this up, when it looks too much, just look at the image, don't look at the slider, and throttle it back until you don't think there's been any change, and then have a look at how much it has changed. And quite a lot of the time, visually, you look at it and go, actually, that's really nice, I really like it. And you'll be quite surprised. Some instances you'll be up in the 70s and you won't have really noticed. Other times you might be in 1 or 2. Sometimes you'll even be in a negative. So again, it's just looking at those. And key as well is kind of following a workflow so that you're not fighting against yourself. So each time you do certain edits, you're not boosting the color, and then you then go and do something else which boosts the color even more. And by the time you've finished, you've like I did a lot. I used to quite like vibrant colors. And I'd found I'd overcooked it so much because of my workflow. So now I've got a different workflow, which means when I boost the colors, I do that, and the things I do afterwards don't overdo that. And I'm happy to share that with you afterwards, Mike.
Okay.
So go into those, have a play around with them, and just get used to them. As I say, crank it up and then throttle it back a bit, and just visually with your eye see what happens. One thing I didn't touch on is color calibration of your monitors. Probably something you're all aware of. I didn't have a clue about it when I started, so that helped me make some horror stories. Now I've got the X-Rite Display Pro, I think it is. There's one called Spider. There's a couple of others out there. You can get them on eBay, but they are worth their weight in gold, because then you start to, the color you see on your iPad and your monitor and your laptop, they all look the same, rather than you push it from one to another and it looks completely different. So they can really help you with that. Some of the more expensive ones will calibrate printers and things like that. So if you don't want to calibrate your printer, don't think spending more money will just make it better. You just get the one that's right for what you need, because they are reasonably expensive. So in here, you've now got the tone curve. So again, go and have a look in here. You've got the red, green, blue channels, or the RGB channel itself. And in here, it's basically just picking the tone curve, dragging it up and down. Not one that I would recommend, but you just get the gist of it. Again, you can just use the Control Z on the keyboard and bring that back to where it is. Or you can do some preset ones. So adding a little bit of medium contrast or strong contrast will apply some preset tone curves. And you've also got the, I won't be able to show you in all of them from a time point of view, but in some of them you've got these little dots where you can come into here and you can click, and it will start to move the tone curve based on the point that you've selected on the image. So you can see there, I've picked that, or I can pick the darker bit here, and it's moving a different part of the tone curve. So as you start to get more advanced and confident in using the tone curve, you can start to use some of those features. I personally, a lot of the time, I just use medium contrast, just keep it quite simple. I'm not, it's an area I want to get better on tone curves. I'm not overly confident on it, but I do use it a little bit. HSL, hue, saturation, luminance, and color. So here you've got the ability, again, if you're not sure what color you want to tweak, if you wanted to make this heather down here and bracken brighter, you could say, right, I want to increase the saturation of it. Pick the little picker, pick this here, start to move it up, and you can see it's bringing up the oranges and the reds. Now, that's not just impacting there, it's impacting the clouds as well, some of the glow, which might be what you want to achieve, but you're picking out specific colors. So I might then say, actually, I want to bring the green down a little bit. So I want to kind of tone that down. So that's bringing down the greens and the yellows. So you can brighten and darken various different sections, or you can just slide them up and down as you want. So I've chosen saturation there, but you could do the same thing with luminance. So again, if I wanted to pick that and start to increase the luminance on the highlighted area, then I'm doing exactly that there, or I can darken that right down. So you can pick your one, or if you wanted to change the hue to the color of the color, again, you can use that same method on there. You can switch to the color one, which brings a really big one where you've got hue, saturation, and luminance for each of the particular color channels. So if you want to go in and do it that way, you can, or as I say, you can do it through this interface. Split toning, so that allows you to add different colors to the highlights and the shadows. If you were doing, if you were adding, I don't know, more oranges into the highlights, into the clouds and things, you might want to add a bit of blue, and using some of the sort of color, opposite colors into your image. So in here you can say, actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to crank up this saturation purely just so I can see what's going to be affected. Then I could say, actually, I want to add some purple to that. And then what you can do is you can then start to tone that back down. So there's normal. You can see that's just adding into the highlights. So if I said, let's put some orange into the highlights, I can bring that up. It's not going to be a particularly nice edit, but I might want to put some blues into the shadows. So I can put that in here, and then with the balance, you can push it whether you want it more towards the oranges or you want it more towards the sort of cooler side. So they can be quite useful in some types of photographs. So, but again, all personal preference. And to remove them out, you can just bring the sliders all back down, double click, and that will put it back in the middle. So again, just play around with those and see what, see how you get on. Detail, this is your sharpening, your noise reduction, and your color noise reduction, so the luminance and the color. So just to show you an example on this one. So this little fella here, this is Archie, is our little 6-month-old. And if we look in here, we can see there is some noise out here. I don't know whether hopefully you can all see this on your screen, but there's some noise on the pillow. And actually, if I go in a little bit more, you can see there's some color noise in here. So what I can do in here with the color noise, I can just dial that out. So that's all gone now. And if you click on that, the image will zoom in and then zoom back out to full. And this is just a left mouse click. So there I can see that the image still looks nice, but actually all of that color noise, which was there, has now just been dialed out. And clicking and panning, I can now see there's some other noise in here, so luminance noise. So again on here, I can just start to dial that out until I feel comfortable, and then I can come back out and look at the photograph to make sure I haven't made it kind of look a bit cartoony. Sometimes they can do if you overcook it. So it's just a case of, again, personal taste. You can see I'm losing some of the detail there. So it's just getting that kind of right balance between the two. And then I've removed some of it, but not all of it. So that's what those are for. And then the sharpening side. So let's just take that back out and let's just put a bit of that back in for the moment. And then on the sharpening side, the little exclamation mark up here is telling you that it wants you to be zoomed in. That's now disappeared. And what you can start to do is you can start to put the sharpening in to the picture. Now, at the moment, what Lightroom is doing is it's sharpening everything on the image. And you don't want to sharpen everything. So if I come back to, let's pick this image as an example. At the moment, start to crank the sharpening up, but actually I can start to use the mask to tell it what to sharpen and what to not to sharpen. Now that's not very helpful at the moment, but if I press the Alt key on the keyboard, so that's the ALT on a PC or the same on a Mac, you can now start to see white will be sharpened, black is going to be ignored. So I don't particularly want to sharpen the sky, but what I do want to sharpen is the rocks in the foreground. So I can bring this up to about there, just as a guesstimate. And now if I then bring the sharpening right up, I'm not sharpening anything in the sky. There's a little bit of noise up there on this one, but what it is sharpening is exactly what I've told it to sharpen. So that's the Alt key on the keyboard, and then click on the masking one and start to slide that. And as I say, you can, even if you've adjusted the sharpening, you can still come back and tweak this. And then you can adjust the radius and the detailing to suit your own, to see if it improves it or makes it worse. So have a play around with those two. But the key one there is the Alt on the masking, so that you can tell it to sharpen exactly what you want. Okay. Against all of these, sorry, I forgot to mention, there is a little square box. So if I went in on the tone curve, let's use that as an example, and did that edit, clicking that little box will turn the edit on and off. So whereas I did the backslash on the keyboard to do the before and after, if you'd done lots of different edits using one of these panels and you wanted to turn all of them off in one go, you can use this here. So if you'd have done an RGB one and then you'd gone in and done a bit of a green and you'd done various things in here, you can just turn that on and off just to see what it's done to your edit. And I want to put that back to normal. There we go. There we go. Okay. Split toning detail, lens correction. So this has been done automatically during my import, but if you don't do that, remove chromatic aberration. On certain edges, you'll get different colours. So you'll get greens and I think it's blues. You'll get around certain edges that will help remove that automatically just by clicking on it. And profile corrections, that's going to apply the profile correction for your camera. So somebody mentioned earlier, when these smaller updates come in, a lot of the time it's new lenses, new bits of kit. The profiles are being loaded into the tool. So when I turn that on, it automatically knows from the EXIF data in the camera what the lens was, and it'll automatically apply that for you. So hence I just get it to do it. You can override it if you want to. So you can start to mess around with that if you want to start adjusting the picture and warping it, or doing various different things to the system. But that's the default. So that's without it, that's with it. So that's what it's just done. It's just done that slight tweak to it, which was automatic. Transform, I never really used to use this until I went on a course and was down in Poole Harbour. We were doing some wide angle stuff of a load of yachts in a harbour, and actually when I was editing it, because it was wide angle, the left hand masts were leaning quite heavily to the left and the right hand ones were leaning the opposite direction. So what this will enable you to do in here is to come in and it's not going to do a particularly good one on here, but you can draw a line down that edge and you can draw a line down that edge, and that's then going to transform the photo to straighten the walls on that church. Now, obviously in the corners, you've got something that you would need to crop out, but actually if that's the effect that you want, and you want to get away from that kind of wide angle, slight distortion, you can do. Sometimes you want that in the photo because actually that's part of the photo itself, but you can adjust it if you need to do that. There's some presets in here that you can play around with, and you can start to adjust various different bits and pieces, but just the dragging one. So on the mast one, on the left hand mast, I draw a line down here, and on the right hand one here, and it will just transform that image in. And then you just click on that to come in and out of the edit mode.
Yep. Okay,
so that's transform. Effects, so this is your vignette. So this is typically where I'd apply my vignette if I want to do it. I personally find doing a vignette in Photoshop better than Lightroom. There's a particular way I've learned to do it, which I think is a bit more subtle. But if you're just doing something quick and simple, this is very good. You can do that in there. Again, play around with the feathers and the various different bits to get the effect that you're looking for. And then calibration, so this is color calibration. So if you suddenly said, actually, I want the colors in the sky to be lighter or brighter, more reds, you can start to adjust these yourself. And sometimes these are used to create a personal style for a photograph, so that you know that you do this as a preset. So whenever you bring them in, you'd have the greens. You might say, well, actually my camera always makes the greens look more green than I want them to be, and my style is to tone the greens down in the photograph. So you can use this way to do that, so that you always get that consistent sort of look and feel, if you like, in the calibration. Previous and reset. Reset obviously undoes everything that you've done. Previous steps back through it. You've got some things down here which are compare, so referencing them side by side, so you can reference one image against another. If you've done an edit of one and you want it to be next to the other, you'd select them in the view down here, so you can do those. And then soft proofing is all around putting it into a print mode. So this will help you to make sure that when you're printing, Anne mentioned color profiling, and this is where you would load in you can load in the color profile into the computer. So here's your sRGB, your Adobe, and then WW is white wall, which I use for printing. So when I did one on acrylic glass, I downloaded their color profile, which I can then select here. You can see it just changed the colors very slightly in here, but I know that the colors on here, and so the reds there, are outside of, there's a gamut warning, so it's telling me that the colors that I've got on the screen are not what will get printed by the printer, because it's outside of their profile. So if you're wanting to kind of go that far, and I know some of you will be, you can use this to help you make sure that you've got the exact colors ready for printing, and that's all part of the soft proofing feature within Lightroom. The next kind of final part of the edit really are the crop overlay. So let me just look, done that, on here. So first one is your cropping tool, but also your straightening tool. Keyboard shortcut O for overlay. So you can choose different overlay styles, whichever ones you feel that you want to use, so rule of thirds, etc. And then you can either drag this manually, you can turn off, there's a padlock over here, so you can turn that on and off. Now I've told it I just want to scale it however I want. With the padlock on, it's going to maintain the aspect ratio, but I can do this and then I can move that around, and that might be more the image I want to collect or finish with. You've got some preset ones, you can create your own, so you can have a 4:3, so if you're going to create it to go in a photo frame or something like that, you can make sure that you've got the exact aspect ratio in there. And if you want to straighten the horizon, you can hit auto and it will have a go. It's not bad. You can adjust it manually yourself, or if I did that edit, which is a particularly bad one, you've also got this straight tool here, spirit level, and actually I could say, no, actually that line there is the horizon, and it will straighten it based on that horizon there. So if you had a tiny bit of a horizon on the right hand side, but all this was hills, you could literally straighten it based on the tiny little bit on one side. So lots of different ways of doing a straighten, and again, double click will bring that back to normal. How are we doing for time? Nearly there?
We're nearly there, really, yeah.
Okay, I'll just show a couple of little bits and then I'm happy to do a session 2. I've still got quite a lot on my list.
Okay.
Spot removal, I'm going to go to this tool here, this image here. So noise on your sensor, everybody has it. It's a fact of photography. But what you can do into here is you can come into this crop tool here, and there's a couple of different ways of looking for noise. So the first one is to bring up your basic panel, and it's just off the bottom here. Crank the dehaze up to 100%. And then if we are zoomed in, and in Blue Peter mode, there's one I found earlier. So with the dehaze down, you can see it, but just cranking the dehaze up makes them really stand out. And you can press the space bar and you can pan around. So there's one, there's one, there's one, there's one. So not too bad. There's a little bit of something there, but if I didn't have the dehaze turned right up, some of those, see that one there, some of the others, a little one there, a bit harder to see. So that's one tool to use for it. So say zoom in 1:1 and use the dehaze, put it up to +100. The other one, when you're in here, is to use what is visualize spots, or the shortcut key is the A, and that goes into this mode where you're looking for basically donuts. So there's a donut, there's a donut, there's a donut, and there's that other donut. And with some of these as well, if we zoomed out to full mode, went back into visualize, we can certainly see one there, to help you remove those. And if I go in, and what you can then do with this is set your brush size and your feather size. You can roll the mouse wheel, which will do that for you. And I typically have 50% feather, and then you can just put your mouse over that, click it, and what that's going to do is remove that dust spot. So it has a good go at doing that, and then you can just pan around until you find the other ones, and you can do that. If it doesn't do a particularly good job, you can move this around until it looks better. Sometimes you want to do that in normal mode rather than this visualize mode, to make sure you get it right. But this will help you find those dust spots very, very quickly. So that's the visualize mode. And the other tip, which I found, I only found out fairly recently on a course, if you press the home key when you're zoomed in at 1:1, so 1:1 is up here in the navigator, you press the home key will take you to the top left corner of the image. So I'm looking for dust spots. So if I then put it into visualize mode, or if I was to stay in normal mode but crank the dehaze up, then using the page down button, what page down is doing is moving through the image step by step, covering every part of the image, so that I can go through and visually check it to make sure that I'm covering all parts of the image and I'm not missing anything. So that's just methodically going through part by part. So you could do one scan using dehaze, and then the other one, turn on the visualize, press the home button again, and then start to just use the page down, and you're looking through, looking for the donuts in the image. So really quick and kind of consistent way of making sure that you look for everything possible. So that's dust spots and the removal. Just going to set that back because it looks horrific. Red eye. So obviously red eye on people, you can do that. One of your favorites, Mike, pets with a little glow in their corner of their eye. If you don't have it, if you pick this little fella here, and we go in, click the right thing, you can pick pet eye, and what it can do is it can actually just put a little glow, and then it's done a dark one, but you can adjust it to make that white, so you can add that little glint into their eye if you haven't managed to capture it. So a little bit of cheating. But it's more, as I said at the beginning, Photoshop is more about editing the photograph, whereas Lightroom is adjustments. So they are small sort of little tweaks and adjustments. Here, for instance, there's a little bit of something on him. I don't know what that is, but again, in here, I don't want that mode. So I just come in here and I could just go into there, click that, and that's gone. There's another little one just there. So I can quite quickly go in and just start to clean up some of those little bits and pieces on him that I that you see that you don't want. And also, if you wanted to do something, you wanted to remove that piece of hair, for instance, you can drag it and draw that out, and then tell it what part you want it to copy. Not particularly good one, but you get the drift. So you can start to do some simple sort of edits along those lines.
Very good.
And go to there. This one here, so 3 more tiny bits. This is your graduated filter. So if you don't use filters on your camera, but you want to do, you can put your filter here, and then you can start to adjust the exposure or contrast or texture or clarity or anything in this particular bit. So if you wanted to sharpen the foreground but not the sky, you'd put a filter on, or one of these graduated filters, and you can then start to do that. And a tip on that one is, when you're drawing it, it will be wherever you go like this. If you hold the left shift key down, it will always be totally horizontal. So if you straighten your horizon, you know that it's always going to line up with the horizon. So that's just the left shift key when you're adding that, putting that one on. Radial filter does exactly the same thing. So you can then move that around, and then you can adjust this. So you're adjusting the outside. You've got an invert down here, so you can invert, and that will adjust the inside. So if you wanted to blur the outside and put the focus on somebody's face on the inside or something to get that kind of effect, you can do that using the radial filter. And finally, I think for tonight, because there is quite a lot more in here about masks and things, but I think the final one we'll just do is just a brush. So it's exactly the same as everything we've talked about, but you can brush in where you want to make the changes, and you can auto mask if you want to, and clever things, so that you can just, if you wanted to sharpen just these rocks down here, or you wanted to just lighten them, you can brush that on, and then you can start to adjust the exposure or whatever. So that's where I've brushed in, so you can see it's exactly where you want, and you can adjust the flow and the feather, so it's very subtle, to do those kind of things. And that is your adjustment brush.
Very good.
So I think, that's got you to a basic edit stage and an import stage, and dust corrections, leveling, and sort of cleaning up the image. There's more I've got in my notes, so I could probably do another session at some stage, Mike, later on in the year.
Okay.
Or if you're looking for something on one of these where we're all still locked in, and people are interested, I'm happy to do another Lightroom one and kind of take it from where we are now through to exporting it out as a final image. So happy to do that for you if you want.
Okay, yeah, that's great. Yeah, I'm sure we'll come back for that.
So
There's
any
lots of
questions?
tips of that. Yeah, any questions, you'll have to unmute yourself, but feel free.
Just a great big thank you.
You're welcome.
It was very good. Thanks, Andy.
You're welcome anytime. Say, anybody wants to, have got any specifics or anything, feel free to just let Mike know, or I'm happy, Mike, for you to share my email address to club members, and if they want to get in contact about anything specific,
Okay.
more than happy to help.
That's great. Thanks, Andy.
Yeah, I'd like to say thank you very much, Andy. That was a brilliant
Yeah.
presentation.
Thank you very much, Andy.
Certainly picked up a few tips from that, and it was very well done, and hopefully it'll help people get a lot more out of it.
Yeah.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you.